So we are here at the Aspen Institute Germany's German-American Trade and Tech Conference with Dr. Susan Aaronson, who is Research Professor of International Affairs and also the Director of the Digital Trade and Data Governance Hub at George Washington University. I used to live in the Foggy Bottom area, so I know it well. But we, have been discussing some really important questions around trade and tech at the conference, and wanted to ask you a few things about your, background and expertise. Obviously, the U.S. and the EU trade relationship has suffered some conflicts in the past few years, we'll put it that way. What do you see as the path forward for rebuilding trust in that trade relationship?
I think there's a lot of things that the United States needs to do. One of the things is to be humble, and I'm seeing a bit more evidence of that. The hegemon can only lead if the hegemon is trusted and liked by its fellow countries. And so I want to give an example of where this is moving forward, which is, as you know, the EU is still working on regulating AI. But it is based on the traditional approach to regulation in the EU, which is to manage risk. And so the United States is moving forward a framework with the EU on risk management of AI. And I think in the future, while that is not a regulation, it is a framework, that is based on shared approaches that will very much influence corporate behavior. And so that is an attempt to find common ground with the EU. So it's not regulating per se, it's finding ways for corporations to behave within a framework, and that might not be the best or only way, but it is a path towards common ground. And I think we need to see more of that, because the United States is nothing without its allies.
Yeah, I think that raises some important points, and we've heard that over the past day and a half here now. We also want to ask about kind of some of the emerging technologies, and maybe you can talk a little bit about how trade can accommodate some of these emerging technologies, thinking of things like AI.
Well, I don't think the trade system is the right place to regulate it. Unfortunately, more and more digital trade agreements discuss some of these new technologies, and they've had real problems because there is no trade agreement that effectively addresses global AI or what it is built on, which is data. And much of the data for AI is not traded, right? There's no commercial transaction associated with it. So it raises a question as to whether or not this is really trade. The services are traded, but the data that underpins the service and the expertise is almost always global. And so, moreover, that data has multiple uses. And it is multiple things at once, right? Just as human beings are consumers, producers, taxpayers, friends of the earth, workers, data can be a public good, personal. So it's multidimensional, and I don't think trade agreements have come to terms with that at all. So, for example, in the new NAFTA, the new U.S., Canada, Mexico agreement, there's language that says that government data should be provided in a machine-readable format. So it's looking at the question of sharing of data, in a sense, by saying if you put it in a machine-readable format, lots of people can get access and analyze the data and reuse the data. But that's one perspective, right? That's one type of data. What about the data that is held by corporations? That is considered proprietary, but should it always be? Especially if it can have public good uses? Well, I think the EU is ahead of the United States in terms of thinking about that too, and the United States has something to learn from that. And the trade regime also needs to learn from that. But this is a toughie because you don't want to break the existing rules of the system, which is to protect proprietary data, but you also need to find ways to understand that data itself is not just one thing. It's not just an input to Microsoft's AI. It can also serve a public purpose.
We still have a few more sessions left in the conference, but until now, what are some of your biggest takeaways from conversations you've had in the breaks or from the sessions themselves?
Well, as I said to Stormy, I feel like the anger over the Inflation Reduction Act is palpable. And while that doesn't have a huge economic impact, it shows the United States is breaching its promises that it made in the Global Procurement Agreement, and that's not good. A lot of this comes from congressional pressure that American taxpayer dollars should be spent employing Americans and building communities, but that vision is very short-sighted, I think, because jobs are created by foreign investment as well as domestic investments. So it's unfortunate and a true misunderstanding. But I also understand, why many members of Congress feel this way. I do think this is going to be worked out because it is a violation of, as I said before. So that's one thing that I learned. I think there's also real ambivalence about how we govern these technologies and who should govern these technologies. And so I'm struck by the questions I get. I've really enjoyed meeting people, and I think part of there is an anticipation and hopefulness I get from my discussions with people, which makes me feel good about it. It's funny because sometimes I feel like people resent U.S. leadership. The hegemon is always resented, and there's another hegemon on the block, right? A small country named China. But I also feel like people want the United States to take a moral leadership role in trade, in tech, and the United States has been a disappointment in recent years, and I'm hopeful that will change. I see evidence of some changes, and small changes can amount to a lot. But until the United States has a data protection law at the national level, it's going to be a problem. We're not credible.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being here. It's been great to gather such a big group of people in person.